The young girl turned pale and continued to descend, while the stranger and Cocles continued to mount the staircase. She entered the office where Emmanuel was, while Cocles, by the aid of a key he possessed, opened the door in the corner of a landing place on the second staircase, conducted the stranger into an antechamber, opened a second door, which he closed behind him, and after having left the clerk of the house of Thomson and French alone, returned and signed to him that he could enter. The Englishman entered and found Morrel seated at a table, turning over the formidable columns of his ledger, which contained the list of his liabilities. At the sight of the stranger, Monsieur Morrel closed the ledger, arose, and offered a seat to the stranger, and when he had seen him seated, resumed his own chair. 14 years had changed the worthy merchant, who, in his 36th year at the opening of this history, was now in his 50th. His hair had turned white, time and sorrow had plowed deep furrows on his brow, and his look, once so firm and penetrating, was now irresolute and wandering, as if he feared being forced to fix his attention on some particular thought or person. The Englishman looked at him with an air of curiosity, evidently mingled with interest. "Monsieur," said Morrel, whose uneasiness was increased by this examination, "you wish to speak to me?" "Yes, monsieur. You are aware from whom I come. The house of Thomson and French. At least so my cashier tells me." "He has told you rightly. The house of Thomson and French had 300,000 or 400,000 francs to pay this month in France, and, knowing your strict punctuality, have collected all the bills bearing your signature, and charged me as they became due to present them, and to employ the money otherwise." I'm going to warn you right now, this is going to be a tangent of an episode. Let's get this out of the way first. What's happening in this passage? Dante is coming face to face with Morrel for the first time since his imprisonment, since his wedding day. That was the last time he saw Morrel. And he's looking at Morrel's face. And as it says here, when Dante was first imprisoned, Morrel was, quote, in his 36th year at the opening of this history, and now was in his 50th. Dante's taking on all of the details of Morrel's face and what has happened to him over the years. Dumas using the juxtaposition, the contrast once again here to really amplify what has happened. He's not just saying what Morrel looks like. He's saying what he looks like changed from what he initially looked like. So time and sorrow had plowed deep furrows on his brow, and his look, once so firm and penetrating, was now irresolute and wandering. That's not to be underestimated. I mean, we are talking about a character who, at 36, at the beginning of this story, was prosperous, thriving, a benefactor to not only Dante, but the entire ship of the Pharaon, as well as his other fleets, which we have no insight into. There's something particularly tragic about a well-virtued person losing their confidence. To stand and look resolutely at somebody with the confidence that they can help or that they know their place and their worth in the world, suddenly, 15 years later, and being 50, having a kind of wandering eye and indecisive. I picture him kind of slouched in his chair a little bit. That's more than just losing your money and going bankrupt. That's like a erosion of your personality. That's an erosion of your self-worth. So it's not only a fortune that Morrel is losing, it's his knowledge that he himself can take care of any situation. But here's the tangent I wanted to go on. I'm notoriously someone who does not engage with or look at comment sections of things. The reviews and Discord of the show aside, obviously. But for some reason recently, I was looking up a author that I hadn't read, but I've always been interested in, and I think I was initially just kind of interested in what his whole deal was. How much of this tangent do I want to go down? It's Thomas Ligotti, and I have seen the Penguin Classics collection of his collections, Song of a Dead Dreamer, etc., etc. And I was stupidly assumed, because I didn't know anything about him, that he was a Italian writer of weird fiction from the 1800s. Turns out he's still alive. He's still working, and that book apparently came out in 1989. But point being, I was interested in the work because of its association with the weird tales genre, which is something I like. Lovecraft, Clark Ashton Smith, etc., etc. But realized I knew very little about it, and so as I was on the Goodreads page for this book, I just happened to scroll down and saw a comment. But I'm highlighting this one comment because it's indicative of many types of comments I see. So this is not to complain about one person on the internet. It's just a sample size of a larger swath, which was complaining about the style in which Ligotti writes. Now, I haven't read Ligotti yet. I'm very excited to, especially now as I see that he's from Detroit, Michigan. Shout out to my hometown. But the commenter was like really taking to task the style of prose that Ligotti wrote in. And it's very much the style of this very first paragraph, which is one sentence. Now, I'm not going to quote him directly because I don't want to give him any exposure, and I also don't want to dox him because, this is a comment on a book that isn't even part of the show we're talking about. But he's begrudging lines like this, and I'm going to read the quote directly from the book, which is, "The building looked much too intimate in size to afford concealment, and I perceived a certain privacy in its appearance that made me feel a newcomer would have been awkwardly noticeable." So he uses that as an example of a sentence that he hated, saying that it's too flowery, that it's just too many words. Again, I'm paraphrasing because I don't want to quote him directly, but he goes on to say, just say the building was small, not intimate in size. And you perceived a certain privacy in appearance, you mean you saw the house was small. You saw a small house. Now, again, I'm not trying to dox a single commenter here, but that comment rang out in my head when I read this first sentence that started today's passage, which is, "The young girl turned pale as she continued to descend while the stranger continued to mount the staircase." It's one short sentence and then one really long sentence. And I've talked about these sentences here before where Dumas has so many tangents within it that it's sometimes hard to follow. I get a little fatigued by these sentences only because I have to read them aloud. If I was reading this to myself, I like stepping into the worlds in which an author uses 100 words instead of 20 to get their meaning across, because of so many of the analysis that we've done on this show, where you can say something more succinctly, but by using more words or using metaphor and using literary devices, you can be more evocative. There's too many examples that we've gone through on this show where Dumas, yes, in some cases might be, hitting a word count to fill up that column in the serialization that day. But in other instances, one that comes to mind right off the bat is when he is talking about Dante having nocturnal vision, from being in prison for so long, and compares him to a wolf. Or a coyote, and that was much more of a predatory animal than any other kind of nocturnal animals. So that says something. It's not just using words to use words. It's actually building a story. It's literary style. I don't know. I don't know why I got defensive of Dumas from a comment that somebody else wrote on a different author altogether. But I don't know. We have 4 years of episodes to fill out, and that's where my passion was today, was just to maybe appreciate that Dumas will go to great lengths at times and word count in order to really tell that extra bit of story, which is what I think makes a book like The Count of Monte Cristo a classic. Didn't I say in an earlier chapter I was comparing modern writing to older writing and saying that so much of it is just so pared down at this point that there isn't a lot of poeticism in how prose is written? Both can exist, absolutely. One is not better than the other. It comes down to preference. Clearly, this guy's preference is not this, and that's fine. But to criticize something like this or Ligotti, again, I haven't even read Ligotti, so I can't defend him, but to criticize it for not being the thing you prefer seems ridiculous to me. But I'm coming back to Dumas here with a whole new sense of appreciation, and as hard as it is for me to keep the continuity of these long sentences together as I read them aloud, I still appreciate that Dumas has the talent and wherewithal to write this way. So I'm excited to see some more flowery language tomorrow as we continue here through chapter 29. Until then, okay, goodbye. The Countdown of Monte Cristo is part of the Gruntwork Podcast Network. This show is produced, edited, and hosted by Landon Solano. The original text of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. Theme song by Magic Solo. If you want to support the show and others like it, visit patreon.com/gruntworkpod. Thank you for listening. See you tomorrow.